know it's the $1 million question that everyone wants to know what the answer is. And the reality is, it's too early to tell. The Biden administration has been in government for just little over a month. And many of their key appointees to run cabinet agencies like the Commerce Department are not yet in place. They haven't been confirmed by the Senate. They're going to conduct a number of reviews of what past policies and practices were by the last administration. And some of that's going to take some time for them to conduct those reviews and conclude which policies do they want to continue, which policies do they want to change, and which policies maybe do they want to eliminate. So right now it's still a question mark. I would say, from reading what the White House has said publicly, they have signaled, though, that in some areas they still do maintain some concerns with regards to national security related issues, whether it's 5G or artificial intelligence. So I do think the Biden administration is likely still going to share some of the concerns that the Trump administration did. But, from the semiconductor industry, from the perspective of the business sector, our hope is they go about that in a much smarter approach. In the last 4 years, the U.S. semiconductor industry, we were pretty disappointed in the way many of these policies were implemented. They oftentimes didn't allow for the U.S. private sector companies to provide input. We weren't given advance notice before many of these rules and regulations were implemented. And furthermore, our sense was that sometimes they ended up just being a bit too broad. While protecting national security for any government is a very important issue, and it must be taken seriously by government agencies, at the same time, they need to think carefully about what are some of the unintended consequences that some of their actions might have on supply chains, on the private sector, on the economy. And I think, from the perspective of private companies, there really should be a very careful consideration of what those impacts may be before the government takes actions to protect national security. So our hope and our recommendations to the Biden administration with regards to export control is that they take a more narrow focused approach and only focus on technologies and end users that truly have a direct relation to national security, that they fully consider the impact of those rules and regulations on the supply chains in the private sector in the economy before taking action. And ideally, the Biden administration should work together globally in multinational forums, like, for example, the Wassenaar Arrangement, not take action on its own, because sometimes that's just sort of like shooting yourself in the foot. You end up restricting your own companies and actually don't do anything to address the issue of other countries who might be continuing to sell the same technology. So again, our hope is that the Biden administration can take a more narrow approach to export control. But stepping back, our hope is that the U.S. and China, at a political level, at an economic level, can find a more constructive path forward. Can find a way to sit down and talk about some of their differences and manage those differences in a way that brings more predictability and stability to our global economy. Certainly, no one benefits in the private sector by having the U.S. and China or any other country in some sort of prolonged trade conflict. That's certainly not good for cross-border commerce, and it's not good for the semiconductor industry. So we would like to see the U.S. and China sit down and negotiate and find a way to work out some of their differences, and hopefully also find areas for cooperation. There's so much opportunity between our two countries, even in the semiconductor industry, whether it's collaborating to do things like innovating new chips for smart agriculture, or finding ways to manage batteries better so that we have smarter electric vehicles that help us fight climate change, or partnering between U.S. chip companies and Chinese medical device firms so that we have better, cheaper, more power efficient medical devices that can help save lives. We think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity that can and should happen between the private sector, even in the semiconductor industry.